Record to the cloud. Okay. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. 2 weeks ago, it seems like ages ago with everything that's going on. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the sanctity of the individual in liberal thought and ways which, the Jewish tradition is similar to that, not similar to that. There certainly are lots of things which seem very similar, even though the outlook might not be exactly the same. And I gave you an example 2 weeks ago of this, and I actually used that example. It was the example of Akedat Yitzchak. I used it a week and a half ago. There was an Azkara, not in Moldova, in Israel for someone that I knew for many years. And I think it actually, doing it twice and doing it with people who ask other questions, it made it actually even clearer to me. Okay, both how it's to be presented and how it fits into our topic. Okay, what I did last time, I will show you the text. What I did last time is that I used Akedat Yitzchak to try to illustrate a difference between classic modern liberal thought. Okay, again, I'll repeat what I said 2 weeks ago so nobody gets it wrong. I'm not talking about the Labor Party. I'm not talking about progressives. I'm not talking about Democrats versus Republicans. Okay, I'm talking about classic liberal thinkers in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. Okay, those whose ideas led to the world of the liberal republic or the democratic state. Though that's what I'm talking about. And there are lots of things in the Jewish tradition which are highly similar to this. It's even arguable, and we'll argue a bit tonight, that these ideas even result ultimately from the Jewish tradition. It's not far-fetched at all. Okay, and yet there are also significant differences. And the main difference that I tried to bring across some weeks ago, I brought you this text where Immanuel Kant criticizes the Akedah. He says it's immoral to murder a child. The child has a right to life. Every living human being has a right to life. And if I don't know, shoot you in the head, okay, if I murder somebody, what have I done? I have deprived another person of their right to life. Okay, we are all rational beings, says Immanuel Kant. We all therefore need to act in a way which respects the individuality and the rights of other people, and that is what he calls the categorical imperative. Okay, the source of morality for Kant. And what he says is that Abraham was willing to violate the categorical imperative. Abraham was immoral. If Abraham had acted morally, what should he have done? You should have said, no way. Okay, even if you are God, you can't be God, because God wouldn't command someone to violate the categorical imperative. Even if you are God, it doesn't matter.
Of course he would. He did it himself.
What? I'm sorry.
Didn't he sacrifice his only son? Jesus.
Wrong tradition.
The story of Jesus comes from this. You have to admit it. All right.
Okay.
So according to the Christian theology, God sacrificed his son. They say he died for your sins.
It's a good point. It's a good point, Ron. We actually did it 2 weeks ago. In other words, 2 weeks ago, I explained that no one in the pre-modern world asked Kant's question. We had Jews and Muslims and Christians, right? And at least in terms of the Christians, why did Christians never ask this question? Because for them, the binding of, not the binding, it's not,
No, sacrifice.
they're not the binding of Isaac, the sacrifice of Isaac, as it's called in the Christian tradition, is the prefiguration of the crucifixion. Right. Okay? Right? This is the model for saving humanity from sin. Okay? This is not something to be condemned. Okay? So pre-modern Christians, not only did they not ask the question, they could not ask the question. It wasn't even possible for them to ask the question. And Muslims didn't ask the question for a separate reason, okay? And Jews didn't ask the question for their own reasons, okay? In the Jewish tradition, you find the most controversy, meaning the most in the Jewish tradition, you find a lot of sense that this is deeply problematic. But you never find the suggestion that Abraham should have said no. Okay? In the Christian and Muslim traditions, you don't even have a sense that it's problematic. On the contrary, it's the ultimate, right? Islam, the very word Islam, which means to submit to God, is based on the model of what Abram does on that mountain. And for Christians, it's the crucifixion, and for Jews, it's something else that we did a couple of weeks ago. Okay, we saw some sources on that. So Kant says Abraham should have said no. Then I brought you, and so, but what I want to do now is say this in a clearer way than I said it 2 weeks ago.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Yeah.
How do you explain the situation with Yiftach?
With Yiftach and his daughter.
Yeah.
I'm going to politely decline. Okay.
Sacrifice.
Okay.
It wasn't from God. God
They didn't have
He made an oath.
at that time.
He made an oath. He made an oath. Your question is a question which has fascinating debates throughout the ages on. But if we go there, we're never gonna get back to here. It's not exact. There's a similarity, but it's not the same.
It's also not God telling him to do it.
What?
He
He made an oath. It's not God's
stupid
command.
oath. And
In any case, I'm sorry?
The Muslims believe it was Ishmael, not Yitzhak.
That's
Well,
a different story.
I didn't hear.
In any case, regardless of who it was, it shouldn't have been done. Right? You're saying with Yiftach, it's also immoral, right? How can he, sacrifice his daughter? According to Kant, this is what I failed to say a couple weeks ago. God's command to sacrifice Isaac was a clear violation of human rights. Okay? Yes.
Nobody takes into account that it was probably extremely common to practice human sacrifice in the era that
Yeah, but
Abraham
we were
was,
specific.
and we were the first
prohibited.
ones.
Jenny, it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Kant would say that if that was the practice, then it was an immoral practice that violated human rights.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Okay.
But just
Yeah.
to look at, because we have
Yeah,
this thing
I
these
love
days
it.
of taking current moral values and trying to apply them to
Kant
places in history. where
Kant is not in a world where you have subjective values. For him, this is categorical. It is an objective value. In any society which violates it is immoral. Okay? In other words, Kant is not politically correct. Okay? I'll even go out on a limb and say that classical liberalism is not politically correct. Politically correct is the opposite of classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is based first and foremost, like we did 2 weeks ago, on the sanctity of the individual. And therefore, any system of values or morality which does not dignify the sanctity of the individual is simply wrong, okay, in a classic liberal view. Okay, that is maybe not what the Labour Party says in Britain, okay, but that's a classic liberal view. Okay, now According to Kant, I'll say this again. Yeah.
Would he also apply that to capital punishment?
Would he also apply to? I do not know. I honestly do not know what Kant thought about classical punishment. But 2 weeks ago, we saw a Jewish justification for capital punishment because of your question. Okay, so they did at least deal with the question. To get back to our main point here, a clear violation of human rights. Is that a traditional Jewish view?
No.
In a traditional Jewish view, is it a violation of human rights to murder someone?
Yes. It depends if
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
exceptions.
you shall not murder.
You shall not murder for sure, but why not?
Because God said that.
Asa et ha'adam. So, when you murder someone, when you've murdered a tselem Elohim, an image of God, have you violated human rights?
No, you have not violated human rights.
What have you violated?
God.
You violated God's
You have murdered
command.
God. Okay, in other words, Kant is saying something which fits, which has a deep similarity to the Jewish tradition. But there's also a very deep difference. In the Jewish tradition, you have an obligation to God. Therefore, you may not murder an image of God. Ki b'tselem Elohim asa et ha'adam. That's why you may not murder. In fact, in the Ten Commandments, we did this once, I think with this group, most of you, okay? If you put the first 5 next to the last 5, you see that I am the Lord your God is parallel to you shall not murder. And it's not an accident, apparently. You shall not murder the human being, which is an image of God. Okay? So, in the Jewish tradition, it is not a matter of human rights. There is sanctity to the individual, but the sanctity of the individual does not give rise to rights. Rather, the sanctity of the individual is being an image of God, and it's your obligation to God that prohibits you from doing that. Now, the next thing we did 2 weeks ago was this piece about the commitment to justice, which very, very briefly said that it's an answer to Kant, but it's also very deeply traditional in its outlook. And it says that no, it's not that human beings exist. It's not that we're here, we're alive. And since we're alive, we should have rights. And since we're alive, what's the moral way to live from birth to death? Okay? Modern ethical systems are all based on the idea that human beings exist and are alive. You're here. So once you're not just modern, even ancient in Greece, same thing. You're here. So once you're here, that's a given. What's the best way to live your life? That's the basis for Western ethical systems. But in the Jewish tradition, that's not the basis. The Jewish tradition, in the Jewish tradition, this piece says, the basis is the opposite. Since we're not going to read it, I'll stop sharing, okay? In the Jewish tradition, the basis is the exact opposite. It is not given that I'm here. It is not given that I'm alive. The fact that I'm alive is the most extraordinary thing. The fact that I was born is a miracle. And what does obligation derive from? It derives from the very fact that I was born. If I was born, then I need to spend my entire life looking for ways to justify having been born. How can I live a life that will justify having been alive? What can I do in my life to justify my being here. Okay, which is the exact opposite, okay, of what Kant is proposing. And you bring it, and what he does in that piece that we read, he brings it back to Akedat Yitzchak and says, right, Yitzchak should not have been born, right? He should not have been born. His mother was 90 years old. He should not have been born. The very fact that Yitzchak was born is a miracle. It's an extraordinary gift. And in that way, Yitzchak is a symbol for all of us. Because even though our mothers weren't 90 years old when they gave birth to us, right? Nonetheless, every birth is a miracle. Every life is a miracle. Every human being that exists is a gift. Okay? So Isaac should not have been born. So Isaac can be demanded to be, the gift be returned. And then when God sends the angel to stay Abraham's hand, do you remember what he said? When God sends the angel to stop Abraham's hand, that's Isaac has been born a second time. Okay? Only God.
What did he say?
What?
What did the angel say?
Not to slaughter Isaac.
Yeah.
Al tishlach yadcha el hanav. Don't slaughter Isaac. Yeah.
Why didn't God himself say to Abraham?
Why wasn't the direct
Why
command?
did he send an angel to do it?
Why an angel? Why not? It's a fantastic question. Actually, the commentaries really do deal with a lot. But again, it's a little off topic. Okay. Okay. It's a little off topic, but the idea is, just to sum this up in a single sentence, the idea is that, okay, the idea is that there are no human rights. There are only what? Human obligations. Okay, and to bring this thing completely home in the war that we're currently involved, it's not just for individuals. It's not just individuals have no rights, only obligations. It's also for nations. Because when I did this a week and a half ago, for the second time, somebody made a really powerful point. He said, in my view, the meaning of Akedat Yitzchak has always been, he said, that just living as a member of the people of Israel, it always demands real, literal sacrifices. Okay, I mean, you've all heard of Emil Fackenheim, I assume, right? The idea of the 613th commandment. Okay, that after the Holocaust, what's the 613th commandment? Is don't let Hitler win. In other words, don't let the people. He wanted to destroy the people of Israel. Don't let the people of Israel disappear. This is Emil Fackenheim, and Fackenheim says that every single person who chooses to live as a Jew is doing something which is extraordinarily dangerous, both for himself or herself, for your children, your grandchildren, your great-great-great-grandchildren. What have you done, right? By choosing to be Jewish when you could cast it off, and you could just end that whole story, at least for yourself or your line or your family, right? You are putting yourself and all your future generations in danger. Okay, and there will be sacrifices. It's not that there could be; it's that there will be. Okay, and that this person said is Akedat Yitzchak. Okay, to give you.
Where is? I have a question.
Yeah.
So where is V'shivru al nafshateichem?
That's exactly Fackenheim's point, Chana. Fackenheim is saying, if it was just a matter of keeping safe, then the most responsible thing to do would be for every single Jew to stop being Jewish. That's exactly what he's saying, Khan. But he's saying the 614th commandment is don't let Hitler win. If you just want to be safe and you want to prevent these sacrifices, then you've let Hitler win. That's exactly the discussion that he engenders.
People
Yeah.
tried that during the Nazis, and the Nazis didn't listen. You're
The
Jewish, we're gonna
The
kill you.
Nazis didn't listen.
It makes no difference.
Exactly, and the Ayatollah in Tehran, right, who is he's directing this war. Okay, he also right. It doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't matter. And
They know we're a people and not just a religion.
what?
It's because they know we're a people and not just a religion, and they recognize it more than we do often.
Yes, and I mean the anti-Israel propaganda is exactly that the Jews are a religion, not a people. Okay, that's what Muhammad Abbas says. That's what
Don't care if we convert, we're still Jews.
that's the Nazis.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, and so that's what Don's saying. It's an inner contradiction. In other words, the anti-Israel propaganda has a field day with this. This is a religion, so why does it deserve a country? Right? You hear this all the time.
No,
Okay,
no, but I'm
and
responding to what Brian said
yeah.
about the Nazis.
Yeah,
They recognized we were people.
the Nazis,
Yeah,
right? The
even
Nazis
we don't
called us a
always.
race.
Yeah.
Okay, and you realize that Iran is one of the few Muslim countries in the world today that still has a significant number of Jews. Is I don't know, 8, 9, 10,000 Jews in Iran, and it's very important to the Ayatollah that they remain. Why? Because we can tolerate Jews as a religion, right? We just will not tolerate that they have a
Country.
okay.
Yeah, when
So,
the
yeah.
reform movement, when I was growing up, said,
Before the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Before the Holocaust.
yes.
Yeah.
No, didn't grow up before the
I'm not saying you grew up there, but before the Holocaust, the reform movement was anti-Zionist.
Yeah, well, even in
Yeah,
the 40s.
yeah.
40s. Yeah, in the late 40s, when the nation was established or was declared, and the reform movement was still saying, the Jews are a religion, why do they need a
I'm
country?"
actually kind of surprised to hear that.
I grew
Because
up
in the wake of the Holocaust, the reform movement officially, in an official act, became a Zionist movement.
Oh, not where I was growing up.
Okay,
That's one of the problems we have in the country is that the
yeah,
reform and to a great extent also the conservative
yeah.
did not take on the Zionist cause, and so they're
The
underrepresented.
conservative movement in the United States was the most Zionist movement ever in existence.
You're right, almost both, it's
Well,
true.
Yeah,
But the reform movement was not, and the reform Zionists only came out when we started coming to Israel. The Arza, which is a reform Zionist movement, only became active sometime in the 80s or something.
really?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, my teacher, Professor Menachem Kellner, lives in Haifa. You know what street he lives on? Rechol Abba Hillel Silver. You know who he was?
Yeah.
He was a leader of the reform movement during the Holocaust. He
But
was a
what-
Zionist.
But what the
Yeah.
leaders isn't always followed by the followers.
But I think what
Yeah.
happened more was they were into sending money and sending other people, but they didn't want American Jews
But
necessarily.
that's the old joke, you know. What is a Zionist? Someone who wants somebody else's kid to make Aliyah.
Huh?
But officially, on an official level, because of Abba Hillel Silver, personally, the reform movement, at least in an official way, became a Zionist movement after that. Maybe it took some time to trickle down or something. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Rabbi, I think people are getting their facts wrong. I mean,
Okay.
Geiger, who was German, who lived in Germany, he had several ideas in reform. He wanted to reform the synagogue and liturgical practice, and at the same time, he espoused the idea that Jewish was a religion and it should be practiced in whatever state Jews lived in. So he was anti-Zionist, but that did not persist. You're quite right. The Reform movement officially is very supportive of Israel and was in more recent years. But the original, which is Geiger in the middle of the 19th century, did not. So let's drop the subject because those are the facts.
Correct. In other words, so it did persist until the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Right, the
I
anti-Zionism.
only became scientific
After,
after my daughter was born
yeah,
and somebody took me to a Hadassah meeting.
yeah. Uh-huh.
That did it.
That's the meeting did it. Okay, do any of you know the story of why the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel? Anyone know the story? A true story. What? The Zionist Congress should have been held in a central place in the center of Europe where people could come, railroads from every direction. And Herzl wanted to hold it in Munich. Can you imagine? In Munich, I founded the Jewish state. If it had been in Munich.
Yeah.
So he wanted to hold it in Munich. Why was it not held in Munich? Does anybody know? Why did it go to Basel? It was not held in Munich because the local Jewish communities, both the Reform and the Orthodox, could completely agree on one thing. Under no circumstances did they want a Zionist Congress in their city. Because they were both anti-Zionists, like Joseph just said. Okay? Now, to end our point here, there are no human rights, but rather human obligations for individuals and nations alike. That's also, I said that my whole story with my wife, okay, in the funeral has some connection to this also, okay, and there's an obligation to give honor. You'd like it, the children show honor to their parents because they love them. But even if you don't love, there's still an obligation to give honor. And this is a very, very profound difference between liberal thought and the Jewish tradition. Now, we need to get into tonight. Okay, stuff. What I have is just a moment. I added another page to the file. I hope I wasn't misunderstood. Okay, I'm using this for the whole first part of the course, this file. And last time we did number one, the sanctity of the individual, is this liberalism? And to sum it all up, there are things that are very similar to liberalism, but it's also arguable that there's maybe a certain deep difference from liberalism. And tonight we're going to do rule by the consent of the people. That's another classic liberal idea. Okay, and it finds expression in democratic models. And rule by consent of the people is also an idea that is found in the Hebrew Bible and in the Jewish tradition. Okay, so are these two things the same? In other words, is rule by the consent of the people in the Jewish tradition, is it similar or the same as rule by consent of the people in the liberal tradition or in democracy? And I brought a book. We're not going to read the book, but I wanted to show you the cover. Okay, I'll pass it around here in Kilat Hakerem for those of you who can't see it well. Okay, it's called Proclaim Liberty, right? Proclaim. It's the Liberty Bell, right? Mm-hmm. The Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, inscribed upon it is proclaim liberty throughout the land and Americans and unto the inheritance thereof. Okay, where is that from?
It's the Torah.
It's the Torah, yeah. Go on.
From the Jubilee.
Okay, it's from the Jubilee. It's from Leviticus, Vayikra,
Yom Kippur.
right? Ukratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. Right? Proclaim liberty throughout the land and unto the inhabitants thereof. And it is not an accident that a verse from Leviticus is inscribed on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. So what is this book? Proclaim liberty throughout the land. In smaller print, it's the Hebrew Bible in the United States, a source book. I don't know
Which parsha is?
which parasha. I think it's Emor. I think. Okay. So anyway, or Bahar. It's Emor or Bahar. So this book is a source book. And how is it a source book? It's a source book of writings by early Americans from the Puritans all the way until the Civil War. And to show how the documents of America are deeply rooted in the Hebrew Bible. And as I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, it is not at all surprising for a Christian society to be deeply rooted in the Bible. But most Christian societies that are deeply rooted in the Bible have the main emphasis on the New Testament. In America, there was an unusually high degree of emphasis on the Old Testament. Okay, and it came out in many, many ways, and those ways are what you can read about in this book. One of the ways which it came out in America is this very idea. I'll put the text on again now. Is this very idea of rule by consent of the people. Okay, that was very important to early Americans, to those who were revolting against the king. Okay, you can easily see the parallel that the early Americans saw. Okay, what was the parallel? Who was King George?
Pharaoh.
He was Pharaoh. Okay, and who were the people? Who were the people signing the Declaration?
Israelites.
The Israelites. The people are the Israelites. And I guess if you need to, so who was Moses?
George Washington.
George Washington. Okay, and the argument was that that you can only govern through the consent of the governed. Well, what do we have in the Torah about that? Who gets to govern?
God.
God governs. Okay. Avadayim. Asher hotzei me'eretz Mitzrayim lo yimkeru mimkeret avid. There's a prohibition in the Torah to take an Israelite and sell an Israelite as a slave. Why? Because they are my slaves, for I redeemed them from the land of Egypt. They were slaves to Pharaoh. I redeemed them, and now I am their master, says God. And if I am their master, they cannot be slaves to other people. Okay, so one of you said, I missed who said it? God, one of you said it there. God governs. Okay. It's a very important idea that God governs. In fact, it already came up tonight, right? Murder is prohibited because it's a violation of an obligation to God, no less. Okay, so that's an important idea. And yet, in practicality, how does God govern?
He chooses the one that governs.
All right, well, that's one way to do it, says Hannah. Okay, maybe God tells us who's going to be the ruler, perhaps.
And what
Okay.
happens when he doesn't, when the
Yeah.
people choose, quite
Yeah.
often they choose wrongly, and we see the results now.
Okay, if people choose, they can choose wrongly, and then we can have all kinds of disappointments. What happens when God chooses?
Same thing.
And Ryan says the same thing. So what's the example of the same thing? There's a good example of it.
Knesset,
God chose the Knesset.
of course.
All right. In the Bible, you have an actual example of God choosing a king.
Yep.
Shaul.
Shaul.
So,
And that just doesn't work out.
No.
God chose, apparently, the wrong guy. Or, to be more generous to a traditional view, Shaul did not live up to the expectations of God.
I'm the victim.
Blame the victim.
Not Shmuel,
What?
not the Shmuel, not
The God
the
should
prophet
know
Shmuel.
one.
Shaul.
Shmuel is the one who actually chose him.
Right.
no,
That God told.
Shmuel did not choose him. Shmuel was told to choose him.
His mother gave him because she couldn't have a child.
We're getting into lots of stories from the beginning of Samuel. The bottom line is that God chooses, first of all, Samuel, okay, to be the book of Samuel goes right after the book of Judges. And Samuel is like a continuation of the Judges. But there was a problem that with human beings, it's not always like father, like son, right? Samuel's children did not walk in his ways. And the people demand a king.
Yeah, I think God already gave in sort of reluctantly, didn't he? You want to be like all the other nations. And I say,
We'll have to see that in the text. That's important what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're going to get to that in the text. But just to get the basic point of the story is that God tells Samuel whom to choose.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, there is no credibility with that, because when the leaders came to Shmuel and said, put a king to us, he was very angry. And he said, you don't need it, you have God.
We're gonna see
Where's your king?
We're gonna see
Why do
that.
you need it?
We're gonna
So
see that
where-
very text.
I mean, what is the idea that God came to Shmuel and said,
Because that's the continuation of the story. After the guy Shmuel gets upset, and God says, nonetheless, if they ask for a king, we'll give them a king, and then God shows Shmuel who the king is going to be. It's the continuation. We're going to see tonight Samuel chapter 8, and the next chapter, chapter 9, is what you're asking. Okay, and okay. So we have the choosing of a king in the beginning of the book of Samuel. And it's important not to forget what it comes after. Okay? In the book of Judges, there's no demand for a king. The refrain of the book of Judges is, Bayamim hahem ein melech b'Yisrael, ish hayashar beinav yaseh. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Each person would do
Whatever they feel like.
in his own eyes. Okay? And there's no demand in the book for a king. There's certainly no demand from God for a king. And yet, it's a system that doesn't work well. Okay, when you don't have someone to govern. So that's one place. You already see here in the text, you see 1 Samuel chapter 8. But then you also have in Deuteronomy, you have what's more, more typically Torah. You have a commandment, right? Isn't this whole tradition based on commandments? Obligations?
No,
Right? Is there an obligation in the Torah to have a king?
No.
Some people are shaking their heads, no. And yet the answer is not clear.
Oh, because the
Okay.
king is God.
the obligation in the Torah is having God as a king.
Yeah.
Well, it may be more than that, Cham. It may be more than that. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה.
Amen.
Let's take a look at the Torah. Okay, I'll have to make this smaller. Now all we see is Chana. Good to see you, Chana. All right, here is a commandment. It's Dvarim chapter 17 from verse 19, the second half of the chapter. What I'll do is initially I'll give you just the biblical text and I'll blow it up as much as I can.
Yeah.
Okay, and we can also blow it up this way. And now it'll be really, really good, I hope. Okay, is that clear? Is that good? Can I make it any bigger?
That's fine.
Okay, that's fine, you say, good. Okay, okay. Can somebody on Zoom read, please? The reader needs to be from Zoom because of the setup.
In English or Hebrew,
Oh, in English, yes, I'm sorry.
when you have come to the land which Hashem your God gives you, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You shall surely set him as king over yourselves, whom Hashem your God shall choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother.
Let's stop there a little bit. Okay, do we have a commandment here? Do we have a commandment
Instructions how
here?
to do what we said we were going to do.
Again?
We have instructions how to do what we said we were going to do. You want to change, this is how to do
I
it.
think what Elisheva is saying is, if you want a king, this is the way to
This
do
is
it.
how to do it.
All right, can the verses be read that way?
No,
Hannah says no. Why not, Hannah?
because it said, Som tasim alecha melech,
Mhm.
which means it's like a commandment.
All right.
You shall put upon you a king.
Hannah is being very grammatical, and she's correct. Som tasim, this double verb for for an imperative, for a commandment, is very often the ways commandments are phrased in the Torah. Okay, both positive and negative. Here is positive. Som tasim, you shall surely set a king over yourselves. What?
The translation in the first part is incorrect.
Yeah, how
It doesn't
so?
say you shall say this. It says if you said it, even if you said it.
Where does it say if?
It says when.
I thought, no, man, it doesn't say you will say, it says if you say. If you say that.
Where do you see the word if in either Hebrew?
If you translate V'amarta as if you say.
God can't put words in our mouth. He's saying if you say it.
Okay, oops, I did that wrong, I'm sorry. Okay, ve'amarta. Ooh, it's hard to do this. Ve'amarta. What does that mean? It has a vav there. Okay, it's vav ha'ipuch. Amarta is you said, and ve'amarta is
You will say.
you will say, or it could also mean you shall say. It can mean either of them.
But it doesn't mean if, is that what you're saying?
No, it can mean you will say, right? The time will come when you will say, future tense, or it can mean you shall say, which is a commandment.
It's saying that you shall say this, you shall,
Yeah.
I will set a kingdom on me.
Mhm.
That is, it can be read as a commandment,
Okay,
read as a commandment,
yeah,
but
yeah. The bottom line is that all of you are correct. Okay, these two verses are highly ambiguous. They can be read as an if-then set, right? If you decide that you want a king, then here is the way to go about choosing a king. Or it can be read as a commandment. When you come into the land, there will come a time when you should and indeed must say, I will set a king over me. And there's a commandment, in other words, to have a king. Yeah.
Yeah, where else in the Bible does God tells people what to say?
but it's setting up the context. In other words, when you first come into the land has to be conquered.
Yeah.
Not time for a king yet. Okay? And it's going to take a long time until you're actually at the state where, you know, you're going to set up a monarchy. Okay? When that time comes, is it a mitzvah? Is it a commandment? Is it an obligation? If you look in the Talmud has a very, I won't give you the text, but the Talmud has a very simple debate about this. There's two opinions. One opinion says it's reshut, meaning
Choice.
by choice, right? And the other one says it's chova. And both of them can be correct because you can take these verses are ambiguous. They can be taken one way or the other way. And I would suggest, before both of your questions, I would suggest that maybe it's not by accident. If something so central is phrased so ambiguously, maybe it's because the verses are expressing a certain amount of hesitancy about this whole business of having kings. Okay, yeah.
What bothers me in that, it's not really the Hamorta as much as the whole Agolim Asher. If we are to be separated from everybody else, now God is telling us that you want to be just like everybody else.
Okay, let's look at this. Do you think, people, all of you, that this phrase that you will say in the future, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, is that something positive or negative?
You can argue that it is a positive.
Nice. And someone negative. How would you argue positive, Chana?
Because if you really want to be a nation, a kingdom, and a unit of existence.
Yes.
Okay. Then you want to be that. Then you want the other people around you to recognize you as a country, as a unit of existence. And if you are, this is a question of Israeli or Am Israel or Yehudim, okay? Exactly, this is the question here. Are you going to be a religion or are you going to be a nation? And what he says here is, if you are going to be a nation, then you need to be part of the world nations.
Okay, Chana. So you're reading this that it's a good thing and it's a commandment. And I think what you're saying, tell me if I'm correct, is that there are nations around you. The nations around you have a kind of a civilization. There is much to be learned from their civilization. They have set up monarchies. It is effective for them. It works for them. And maybe you should learn from them. Maybe it's a positive thing to learn from them and to set up an effective system of government for yourself as well. Is that a good an expression of what you're saying?
Basically that, except that that's not necessarily just that. I think that in those countries, there is a nation and there is a religion.
Okay.
And in your country, there should be also a nation and a religion.
This also firms up the nation side. Okay, good. Elisheva, yeah.
Just as an aside, in those days, there wasn't a distinction between religion
Yeah,
and
yeah.
nation. It was
Religion, yeah.
one thing.
How much religion
But-
fits in the Bible is question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We are told over and over and over again, do not do what the nations around you do.
Darabah. If
Don't
you look,
ever do. So to
Yeah.
say, I want to set up a king because that's what all the nations around me are doing, That's expressly what we're told not to do.
Yeah.
No, I disagree with that.
Hannah, pay.
Just a second.
All through the Torah, again and again and again, whenever you have this phrase, Hagoyim asher svivotecha, it's always not to be like them.
It's like a war.
No, I disagree.
Hannah, it's important to see both sides. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah,
And the
what?
nations,
What?
you are light among the nations.
Light among the nations. So that, what does that mean? They're darkness.
A
Sorry,
light,
that's
okay.
a light to.
They're
them.
to learn from us, not the other way around.
Okay.
Light to the
Look,
nations.
look. We have in Vayikra, we have the same, and we have in the same book of the Proclaim Liberty across the land. You also have in Vayikra the rules, and also in Dvarim, you have the rules of kashrut. Okay, which animals can you eat? Which animals can you not eat? Also sexual relations like incest. Okay, again and again, don't eat the things, the disgusting things that the nations around you eat. Don't engage in the kind of incestuous relations that the nations around you do. Oh, like earlier, an hour ago, don't do child sacrifice.
Yeah.
Like the nations around you do. Okay, and certainly do not worship the gods of all the nations around you.
But that's exactly my point. That's
Right.
exactly my point.
Yes.
That those are moral laws, those are Torah laws, those are religious, in other words, religious laws. They're
Yeah.
not laws of governance.
They're not laws of God. So if you have a distinction, Hannah, between religion and nation, and you're saying that the Torah wants the people of Israel to be both, and having the king will like establish the nation side of it, okay? Then you can read it the way you do. But I think Elisheva's point is very, very powerful as an exegetical point. If all through the Torah we're getting this harangue again and again and again, don't be like those nations, don't be like those nations. It's almost impossible to read this verse, right, and not hear echoes of that harangue. And if that's the case, then maybe it's like God is like having a stomach ache here. I know the time is going to come when you're going to want a king like all of their kings. And and I think that's pretty bad. But if you really want a king, no,
This is how.
I'll give you a king.
Well, this also strengthens the
Yeah.
argument that this is a conditional.
A conditional thing,
So if
yeah.
you say this,
Okay.
and you say I want this, then this is what you're gonna do.
Okay. Nonetheless, even though this is a strong point, this in no way invalidates what Hannah said. And in fact, you can take what Hannah said and you can even make it into a very important values issue. Okay, think about it. We're all here in Kilat Hakerem having this course, right? Okay. We all know that we constantly are having this tension and this debate about, how different do we need to be from the nations of the world? Okay, you can find lots and lots of people here in Israel who will tell you that what the Torah wants from us is to keep as far away from possible, okay, from the ideas of the nations of the world. On the other hand, you can find people and groups who say the opposite, who say that the Torah recognizes that which is civilized and has value in human culture outside of the people of Israel, right? Derech Eretz nu kadma la Torah, okay? And the way of the world, meaning the whole world, okay, comes before the Torah. And you can learn Derech Eretz even from animals, let alone from human beings. And you need Derech Eretz in order to live the Torah well. Okay, so if we see Derech Eretz, if we see functioning governments among the nations of the world, then Hannah is saying, let's read it that way. Okay, I know you have another way to show that that's correct. But even on the simplest level, okay, on the simplest level, read it that way. Learn from that which works among the nations of the world. You'll see these functioning nations around you, these functioning monarchies, and you'll say correctly, yeah, it's a good idea if I had a monarchy too. Okay.
Yeah, so up until this point, we ruled ourselves in little tribal groups.
Yeah.
Elders of the tribe. So maybe the king is necessary to unite the elders.
Yeah.
Because otherwise each tribe is battling the other tribe and nothing gets accomplished that's good for the whole.
Yeah. All of that. Yeah. Okay.
And
yes.
there are numerous examples in all of history
Yeah.
how the Jewish people, nation, took ideas from everybody else.
Yeah. Okay, so both of these are true. It is true the Torah harangues us not to be like the nations of the world. And it's true to no less a degree that the Torah tells us to learn from the wisdom of the nation. You know there's even a blessing on it. The Talmud tells us, if someone tells you Torah bagoyim al ta'amin, chokhmah bagoyim ta'amin. If someone tells you that there's Torah among the nations of the world, don't believe them. But if someone tells you there is wisdom among the nations of the world, believe them. There is wisdom that needs to be learned. And there's even a bracha on it, okay? When you see a fantastically wise person, right? If you meet Albert Einstein or something, okay? He was Jewish. Okay. Too many Nobel Prize winners. You meet Isaac Newton, okay? Then there's a bracha, Baruch Chacham Harazim. Okay? The God, secretly grants, wisdom to human beings. Okay. So it's not only that the verses are ambiguous and can be read both ways. And it's not only that they are, in fact, read both ways. In the Talmud, one scholar says it's if you want it, and the other scholar says no, it's a commandment. You need, when the time comes, you need to do it. You must do it. It's an obligation. Both opinions are found in the Talmud. That's not an accident. Okay? It's not an accident that it's ambiguous. It's not an accident that both ambiguous possibilities are championed in a debate in the Talmud. And it's also not an accident. Why is it not an accident? I would argue, because there are two very pivotal values that are coming together in these verses. Okay, the question is, what is our relation to the peoples of the world? That's really what's happening.
Is this like a setup for,
so
that there will then be democracy, that because of this, people will...
Thank you. Okay, is there any hint to democracy here? Let's think about it a little bit. Well, a king doesn't sound too democratic on the one hand, but is there any democratic element here?
Yeah, that you shall set him.
Yeah, it's not somebody coming and says, I'm going to be your king, and if not, I'm going to cut your head off. Right? This is a people which is asking to be governed. Right? The consent of the governed, the consent of the people. Okay.
I also said the commandment, pray for the welfare of the government, because without it, people eat each other alive.
That's right. That's praying for the welfare of the non-Jewish government.
Yes. Whichever government is in.
So all the more so, right? If it's your own government. Okay.
But it's not the people who choose, it's God who chooses.
Well, let's see.
No, the people choose to have a king.
Right, but God chooses who the king will be.
Aha. Well, that's the verse here. You shall surely set him as king over yourselves. Whom shall you surely set? Whom Hashem, your God, shall choose. Som tasim is a form which highly indicates commandment. And it will be God who chooses the person. And we get some rules. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. What does that mean? This is an interesting idea about the consent of the governed, which cannot exist in modern liberalism, at least not in its pure form, okay? Because modern liberalism gave the rise to the republic, okay, to the nation state. In the nation state, you only have two legal levels. You have individuals and you have the national government, the state. There's nothing in between, okay? This came out very powerfully in the wake of the French Revolution. Okay, the American Revolution was characterized by communities. The French Revolution was characterized by a state, okay? And de Tocqueville, when he tours America, this is something that very much impresses him. How even though you have a democratic country, right? People don't just care who's going to be elected president. They're also very, very dedicated to their local communities. Okay, and in France, de Tocqueville claims that that didn't exist. Okay, and he thinks that it was to the detriment of the French Revolution. But regardless, whether it's in America or in France, okay, it's a matter of citizenship. Okay, it's not your brothers. Okay, it's not a people who necessarily have, you know, this kind of a family or tribe or biological connection. Okay, you do have maybe like an echo of this in the United States Constitution, where yeah, only a natural born citizen can become president of the United States.
That'd be 35 years old.
40, I believe, right?
No,
35? 35? Okay.
Youngsters.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was that said?
That you need to be born in the United States.
Yes, that's correct.
And you also need to be 35, someone says. I thought it was 40, I guess.
35.
Okay.
Doesn't matter, but there's no top limit. That's the problem.
Current events. Okay. So one from among your brothers shall you set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you. In Hebrew, ish nochri, who is not your brother. Even if you want to, even if you consent, there is something wrong, according to the verse, that someone from another people should rule over you.
So how did Herod get into it? Just because the Romans decided they were going to?
I don't even think, with respect, I don't even think that's a question with Herod. Because what was the attitude towards Herod?
We hated him.
They hated him.
Yeah.
They justifiably hated him. You know, so.
There is another.
Yeah.
It wasn't we who put him up
What?
there.
Can you bring it back?
Bring it back to the previous verse, yeah.
He must come under this law.
Yeah.
Sim alecha melech asher yivhar Adonai Elohecha.
Yeah.
Then what is the point of saying, oh no, don't put my free? Since I am God, I'm gonna tell you who's gonna be king.
That's a good
Why-
question.
Why?
If I'm telling you anyways, then why are we getting these like criteria?
In the future, well, I'm going to tell you who.
Yeah.
Because
We're told.
That's a very halachic argument. That's like a halachic twist like this. You're saying you need to listen to me, but if you don't listen to me, you'll violate an extra commandment by putting on a
That
foreign.
God isn't stupid, he knows.
That's nice. Yeah.
That's
I have the Steinsaltz Chumash in front of me, and he has a little comment that I think you'll find interesting. It says in chapter 14, in verse 15, you shall place a king over you whom the Lord your God shall choose, just like you've got it there. But he adds, through a prophet.
Yeah.
Ah,
When he adds through a prophet, he's thinking whoever added those words is thinking of Samuel. God
That's correct.
tells Samuel who to choose as king.
Yeah, he's essentially making a comment going backwards from the prophets.
Yeah. Okay. So in any case, it's a good question, your question. One among from your only from your brothers, and if God is deciding, then who cares? But okay. Then we have some limits. We have here the word rak. You want a king? I'll give you a king. Or according to the second interpretation, I'll give you a king. But regardless of how the king gets chosen, the Torah is very hesitant about kings and puts limits on the kings. And you can think here once again about the American Revolution, about, I don't know, the Magna Carta, about the French Revolution, whatever it is, okay? Can whoever was reading on Zoom continue reading now? Okay.
From where?
From verse 16.
Only he shall not multiply horses to himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order that he may multiply horses, because Hashem has said to you, you shall not go back that way again.
Okay. You shall not go back to Egypt, and that's the place where you get horses, and you shall not multiply horses. Besides horses, there are two more things you shall not multiply. Verse 17, please.
He shall not multiply wives to himself, that his heart not turn away. He shall not greatly multiply for himself silver and gold.
Oh,
no read.
so what are the three things he's not allowed to multiply?
Horses,
Horses, wives, and money.
And money, silver and gold. Okay, what are those three things?
Power.
These are the three ways, yes, in which people both exhibit power, or leaders, I mean, either exhibit power or use their power for what is horses really?
In those days, horses were an example of war, power to control.
It means you can have a ruler who grandizes, is that the word himself? Aggrandizes himself, not by taking home trophies, but by building a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger military. Okay, and there are rulers who this is how they exhibit their power, or they can exhibit power like the Sultan, okay, in the Ottoman Empire with all the wives, or you can exhibit power with wealth, building palaces, buying vehicles, All right. So those are the three things.
And that's exactly the three things that King Solomon did.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. At the beginning of the book of Kings, Solomon is set up as the example of you wanted to say that too, of the king who did exactly this. Okay? Too much military, too many wives, and too much wealth. And how do you achieve all that wealth, by the way, to support all those wives and build all those armies? Through tax. Okay, which is what Shlomo does.
What I was gonna say is that these are ways of limiting power. In other words, the king could be a king, but he's doesn't have unlimited power.
Yes. So we already see the idea here of not having unlimited.
The check and balance, kind of check against.
We don't know what the check. We don't know what the check.
We don't know what the balance.
We don't know what the balance is, but we have here an attempt to check. Okay, the king.
And I think these are probably things that the kings of the nations did all the time. So again, we're being cautioned, okay, you want a king? Just don't do it the way
And
they
they,
do it.
and they still do it.
Well, of course.
Human nature doesn't change. And when people seek power, whether, as in a government or in other ways, right, this is what they do.
This is what happened.
Okay?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And is there any way to, check and balance, like Don just said? In other words, if you have a king and the king has power and the king can do things, is there any way to get the king to follow these rules, to limit the horses and the wives and the money? Is there any way to do it?
Put it in writing.
Assassination.
Put it in writing is actually what we're gonna see now.
Yeah.
Continue reading Laura. Oh,
Usually it's done by assassination.
well, if you assassinate him, he can no longer do this, correct?
Right.
But if he's
then
alive,
somebody else comes along and does it.
correct. But if he's alive, is there any way to get the king to observe these limits? So if Laura could continue reading, please, verse 18.
It shall be when he sits on the throne of his kingdom that he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Hashem his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them, so that his heart not be arrogant above his brothers, and that he not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, so that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel.
So there's a lot here.
Oh, boy.
First of all, we see to whom the Torah was entrusted in biblical times. It was entrusted, what's one verse before? It was entrusted to the Kohanim HaLeviim. Okay, they're the ones who can write out the Torah and read the Torah to the king. Okay, or teach the king to read the Torah. Okay, that didn't work, and eventually in Second Temple times, because the Kohanim didn't do their job, we get the Talmidei Chachamim. We get this idea of the Torah.
The prophets did.
The prophets
did control the king.
The king prophets didn't usually control the kings, but the prophets with David, that's the best example. Okay,
Yeah.
but there were lots of examples where the prophet speaks truth to the king.
And the king doesn't.
Nobody listens to anybody. Sometimes the king throws the prophet in a pit. Sometimes the king takes all the prophets and kills them. It didn't always work out. Didn't always work out so well. So it's not the prophet, it's the priest, okay, who is going to give the Torah to the king. And what is going to serve as the I don't know, to dampen the king's enthusiasm for power?
Yeah.
Make
Well,
them read it every day.
all the days.
Reading the Torah.
It's to prevent the old adage, which is true, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It absolutely.
It's to prevent that.
Yeah.
But here, the king does have absolute power. And what's being used as a check on that is some kind of a pedagogical device.
Yeah.
Okay? The king needs to be reminded through reading the Torah. Notice he says he reads it himself all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God. Fear, in other words, what is the check on the king?
Fear of God.
Fear of the Lord. That's the check on the king, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them. And what fear of the Lord is supposed to inculcate inside of the king is the king needs to be, as it finishes here, in the midst of Israel. Needs to be one of his people. What needs not to happen is so that his heart need not be above that of his brothers. In Hebrew, I think it's better. Levilti rum livavo me'echav, so that his heart not be set above his brothers, and by accident, and also so that he does not deviate from the mitzvah of the Torah. The way to achieve that is by constantly reading the Torah. This is why there's a special mitzvah for the king to have a copy of the Torah. There's also a mitzvah for every Israelite to have a copy, but there's a special mitzvah for the king for the reasons that you are reading here. Yeah.
I found, I just noticed this, where it says here, the beauty is so in a mitzvah, yaminu small.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had the right and left back in those days, but one of the problems we have in this country is that we have this tendency to say, okay, he's a smoli, or he's a yamini. This polarization between right and left.
Yeah.
And this is saying that the king needs to stay on the straight path, needs to be in the middle, needs to be in a moderate approach to governing. In other words, don't be too harsh, but don't be too liberal, in a sense.
Okay. Also, maybe don't be pushed by the various sides. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
למען יאריך ימים את על מלכותו הוא ובניו בקרב ישראל. That makes it hereditary.
Yes.
Then God is not choosing.
God shows
it's heredity.
God, it's very clear in the book of Samuel. God chooses Bet David. Not David. Bet David. And when it says David, it means Bet David. God chooses the what's the word? House, the line, the lineage of David. Okay.
Well, that's exactly what's happening today. The priests are the Supreme Court, basically.
Again, what?
The priests, the priests here who have the write the law and keep it in his is the exact same as what the Supreme Court is today.
Okay.
And what the God or the government are trying to do is to push the Supreme Court out.
Okay, that's your analogy.
It's the exact same.
Okay, so the Kohanim who are with the Torah, with its mitzvot, they are the Supreme Court. Okay, it's an interesting analogy.
No, what they want to do is they want to replace the Supreme Court with
their flunkies.
Rabbi.
If we're really bringing it into our times, then I'll tell you something I heard today that really moved me. I was thought about it when Don said about right and left, that the king should not be like swayed by voices from the right or voices from the left. Right now, you have this this organization of families who have kidnapped their relatives. That's having what do you call it? And how do you say it in English?
March.
A march from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim. So I saw. I actually wasn't aware of any of this. I hadn't been following any of this at all. And then today I saw, a father. His son is kidnapped. His son is a Chayam, who was very upset. He says that the organization that was set up to represent the families of the families who have hostages, that it doesn't, it didn't even make any effort to include people with divergent ideas, and it goes back right to the beginning of our class tonight. He says that the organization, a lot of the people who are active in it are people who were activists for the Shalit deal. And now they're, so now it's our turn, kind of thing. And he says that he said that well, he said some horrible things. First of all, when they meet, he says, if I come in, I would be attacked. And the only way I can come in and not be attacked is to come in with a picture of my kidnapped son on me, and then they don't attack me, right? And he says that if it's between, if my son, if it's his life, versus the future existence of my country. I choose my country, and it's mamash. She said it feels like an akidat Yitzchak, right? This idea that by being Jewish, that the man sacrifices because of what the people of Israel is always facing. And when you said that, I thought about this. You have a government, which whatever you might think about it, is right now. This is a war of survival, right? It's not just Hamas; it's much bigger.
Yep.
We all know that it's much bigger than Hamas. And then you have a war of survival, and you have 240 hostages, right? And is it right for a government to be swayed by a march from the left or a march from the right? Personally, when I heard this, I was very disappointed, meaning that the hostages has already exploded into a left-right debate. So it's not a healthy thing.
Yeah, that's not the way I've heard of any of it at all. And I actually know someone who's a Chevy now, and his family feels very much like they're together and they're one voice. So I don't know.
Apparently, it's not his voice, but apparently what his complaint was is that the organization came out with a statement that they want the government to agree to an all-for-all hostage swap.
Which would be
Yeah, that's true. That's what they want.
And to do that is for an organization that claims to represent families of hostages, how can they do that?
Why not?
What?
Of course you can.
You're claiming to represent all the families of the hostages. So how can you do that without even talking to families of hostages who disagree?
That's what Jewish leadership is all about. It's every major Jewish organization.
What?
It's just the leadership that decides. Makes
And
policy.
who chose the leaders?
No,
Were they-
also create
You all-
organization.
Members of large Jewish organizations, whether here or when you were in the diaspora, right? What say did you ever have with any of the?
If you're a member of B'nai B'rith, you vote for B'nai B'rith. You have 240 families.
Yeah, no, I understand the point, but you're making, but the organizers don't talk to the, as you were saying, they don't talk to the people who are members of the group who support the idea, in this case, of course, the return of the hostages, but you belong to B'nai B'rith. And B'nai B'rith took positions on all kinds of areas, right? Anybody ask you as a member?
But
Well,
you can
thought-
vote.
No.
Oh, you can vote for a leadership, fine, every 5 years or something, wherever it may be, but they have to take a position on some subject, perhaps in America, for example, right? All right, no, I mean, wherever, doesn't matter, or any other of the big organizations. Zionist Organization of America, all right? Did Klein ever actually find out from the membership of ZOA what their position was on a myriad of issues that we were facing with every day?
With respect, Ron, I think this is different. These are 240 families in a specific situation. And this is a group which is representing these 240 families in the government.
Number one issue in Judaism, from that point of view, is the redemption of the captives. You have to bring them back at whatever cost. You bring them back at whatever cost, and then you deal with the rest.
At whatever cost?
You deal with it afterwards.
At whatever cost? The Talmud in the halacha is En podim et hashvuim yoter mikidei shoviyam. Never redeem a captive, ever, for more than the financial value when they sold slaves, for more than the financial value. ever.
Wow.
Why? Because it encourages the non-Jews to kidnap Jews and then sell them for a higher price. That's the halakha.
It's done repeatedly.
What?
Sure. It was 5 years to kidnap Kadish. I mean, it's just my heart. Every single one of these people, I couldn't imagine
What?
having a family member or a close friend.
We are dealing with it afterwards right now. This is the result of Gilad Shalit. It was planned with Gilad Shalit in mind. Gilad Shalit was the model for what we went through a month ago.
That's why we need a king.
That's why we need a king.
The Israeli have one already saying, the state trying to get rid of it, failed to protect them, and now has a moral obligation to redeem.
The state of Israel has a moral obligation, first of all, to survive.
You know, what we should have done
We will
is not
survive.
give them
We just, actually, this is the first class,
Yeah,
first class that we had, sorry.
yeah. With
First class we had
Sigalit.
with
Sigalit,
Sigalit,
she
we
did
talked
this.
specifically on such shvuim.
Yeah,
There's halachot, there's halachot.
yeah.
There's, in some places it says that it's the highest value in Judaism, it goes above any other thing. In other places it says, there's other things that are more important. So it's just like everything else.
It's not a matter of but okay.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not clear entirely
For sure.
what the halakha is.
It's not just a matter of halakha, it's also, there's a conflict of values here. But it's a conflict of very real values on both sides.
One other point I want to make about this whole thing about the organization, of course, we're talking also about the democracy and leadership.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a month into this, we have this horrendous operation going on. We have the hostages, and these people are trying to organize themselves out of thin air, basically. And of course, there's going to be tension. There's going to be people who don't agree with what's going on.
Yeah.
There is a leadership, but the point is that one of as I understand it, the organization that has arisen is basically just to keep it in the public mind, is to keep it up front, is to keep pushing it ahead. And it's working. I mean, you look all over the world now, and it's a major issue. People are identifying with this in all walks of life, all over the world now, as a major humanitarian.
All over the world, I'm totally with you.
Okay.
I don't know.
Can we get back on topic? Can we get back to the course?
Point being that this
Or take a break and you can discuss it during the break.
I think the point is well taken. Let's put it aside. This is the danger. This course is only going to get more and more dangerous. Right now, we're doing consent of the government. Wow, what happens when we actually do modern Jewish history? Oy vey.
But that's part of the value of a course like this.
Yeah.
That it does make connections for us now and inform us for now.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's, I mean, yes, it makes it take more time, but I think making those connections is important.
Correct. Okay, so let's finish off a little bit for today. What I'll do is I'll share something else for you. Something, we don't have much time left, so just a couple of maybe conclusions from all of this. We didn't even get to see the story in Samuel. Let's do that very, very quickly, first of all. 1 second. Here it is, share. 1 second. 1 second, how we got here. We'll go to 1 Samuel 1:8, and we'll see here too how there's all of this hesitancy. I'll read it very, very quickly. When Samuel was old, he made his sons judges over Israel. He was a judge, a shofet. Now the sons are going to be judges. Judges not in the idea of a Supreme Court, but judges in the idea of the book of Judges, of these temporary local tribal leaders. And they did not walk in his ways. They were dishonest. They took bribes, perverted justice. And so the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Shmuel. And they said, you are old and your son does not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Okay, a similar formulation, although the word is different than in Deuteronomy. But the thing displeased Samuel. Because Samuel was acting as the representative of God. When they said, give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed, and God said, the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, Samuel, as my representative. They have rejected me from being king over them. Somebody said this right in the beginning of the class, right? God is, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up from Egypt, even to this day, they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they do also to you. Now therefore, look, heed their voice. That's exactly what we have in Deuteronomy, right? If you ask. But it seems to be favoring the interpretation that it's reshut. That it's if you ask, then no, there will be a king. However, you shall solemnly warn them and declare to them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. The manner of the king in Hebrew is Mishpat HaMelech. The translation is possible, but what could Mishpat HaMelech mean?
Judgment.
The word of the king.
The law of the king.
Just king.
The laws of kings. What are the laws that apply to kings? What is permitted to a king? What is perhaps not permitted to a king? You could also read it that way. In other words, the verses that we're about to see, do they describe how the king will act in real life? Or do they describe how the king is permitted to act legally? So if we skip to verse 11, he said, this will be the Mishpat HaMelech that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for him, for his chariots and to be his horsemen, and they shall run before his chariots. In other words, what will he do to your children? He'll inscript them. And he will appoint them to him for captains of thousands and captains of 50s, and to plow his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and the instruments of his chariots.
So there'll be a feudal lord.
It's more than a feudal lord. He'll be, this is a European king for an army. And he will take your daughters to be perfumers and to be cooks and to be bakers. Okay, you brought up Solomon. Solomon did all of this. What was the tax of Solomon? It wasn't just money, it was a draft. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive groves, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give them to his officers and his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and your best young men and your donkeys and put them all to work. He'll take a tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. You want a king? You're going to be his slaves. And you will cry out on that day because of your king, whom you shall have chosen for yourself, and the Lord will not answer you on that day. But the people refused to heed the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, there shall be a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. In other words, why do they want a king?
They need governance, don't they? Because before that, every man did what was right in his own eyes.
Yeah, okay. They want somebody central who will be able to defend them militarily. Okay, that's all the background story in the book of Samuel. You have the Philistines. Okay, this is what they need a king for. You know, if you go even to to the 18th century, okay, what is the how if we have human rights and rights to property and stuff like that, how can we be forced to accept a government? So what was the claim?
Divine right.
And that's the divine right of king. I'm talking about the liberals.
Wow.
What was the claim of the liberals? That we have a social contract. Okay, because I can't survive on my own and you can't survive on your own. So we get together and we each agree to give up some of our rights for our mutual benefit, so that there will not be anarchy and that people won't come to conquer us. Okay? And these liberal thinkers found that exactly here. First, they saw here in this passage that I just read, they saw the possibility of the abuse of power. At the very same time, they saw that people may be willing to give up their rights for a common good. They're willing to sign on to the social contract. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he spoke them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, heed their voice and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, go every man to his city, and I'm going to bring you a king, which he does in the next chapter. All right. Now, what did the revolutionaries in America make of this? What did they get out of this? Okay, the kings can abuse power. That nonetheless, people are endowed with rights, but they can give up rights in order for the common benefit. Find all of this, by the way, in the very words, I think, of the Declaration of Independence. Almost word for word, right? For the common, I forgot how it goes already. What?
There's also a question here about inheritance.
Yeah.
The question talks about the sons.
Yeah.
So you're setting up a dynasty. You're setting up an inherited position. And the U.S. specifically said we don't, because they had that question in the Federalist Papers. Should we set up like Europe? They said no. We don't want to have hereditary positions at all.
Right.
And so that.
Can you get that out of this passage?
That's what it talks about.
Absolutely.
About the sons.
Okay, this is a position which is going to be abused. And so this is Samuel saying this, right? The prophet of the Lord, right? He's saying this. So if Samuel can say this, the American revolutionaries can get together and say to themselves, what? On the one hand, there is something sensible about demanding a central government. On the other hand, can we figure out a way to limit, okay, these abuses of power? And that's exactly what they went along to do. In Britain, in the centuries before that, you have a similar process. You don't get rid of the king, but rather, what do?
Yeah, the Magna Carta.
So what do you do? What is it? What does it do?
Puts limits on the power of the king.
On the one hand, it limits the power of the king, and on the other hand, it creates,
House of Commons.
Right, it creates a House of Lords and a House of Commons. In other words, it creates counterweights to the power of the king. And even if the king still has a lot of power, and even if the king is even still hereditary in England, nonetheless, the king is no longer all powerful. Okay, because there are counterweights. Okay, so these are the biblical models. If we take this further, we don't have time, so I won't do it, but on Deuteronomy, Ibn Ezra and the Barbanel, they come along and claim that they have to explain the verses. Is it a mitzvah to have a king, or is it if you want to? Is it reshut? And they both claim that it's reshut. And they both claim that it's reshut based on the passage in Samuel. Okay, here it's only because they're demanding, and God and Samuel are unhappy with this. It's very easy to argue that it's reshut. It's very easy to argue that there's no demand to have a king. It's only if the people consent and decide to sign on to the social contract, only then, right, can you take power away from people with their consent. So you already have this idea coming up in the commentaries. And the commentaries that they go for pshat, for the plain sense of the verses, they tend to side with the idea that it's not a commandment. Okay? That doesn't mean that the other interpretation is wrong. Maybe it's right. Okay, but the verses, especially with the context in Samuel, they tempt the commentaries into going for the other side. Rav Avram Yitzchak Kook wrote the following. When he dealt with the laws of monarchy, he says that since the laws of monarchy pertain to the general situation of the people, in other words, the people exist, they're in a certain situation, they're threatened, say, by enemies or something like that. These legal rights revert in the absence of the king to the people as a whole. Okay, so let's say you have a king threatened by foreign enemies, okay, but there is no king. Okay, so the legal rights revert to the people. There's no king, no Davidic king, but the people hold sovereignty. Specifically, it would seem that any leader who uses the word shofet for a temporary leader, a leader, chosen in the wake of whatever's going on, who arises in Israel, has the status of, look at this, a king. Din melech yeshlo in many respects, especially when it concerns the conduct of the people. What does he say? He's saying that if the people consensually choose a leader, then the obligation of the people is to follow that leadership which they have freely chosen, no less than they would follow the king. Okay, can you bring this down to earth? Of course, it's hard to bring him down to earth often. What he's saying is that he didn't live in the time of the state of Israel. But even before the state of Israel was established, there was a government of the Yishuv, okay, which was elected. Okay, in fact, to Rav Kook, when they had elections for the Yishuv, a question came up which may interest a lot of you: are women allowed to vote? Okay, Rav Kook was against women voting in the elections of the Yishuv. Okay, but he was overvoted. He was overruled by the Mizrahi movement. Believe it or not.
That's interesting.
Okay, a lot of historical things that you wouldn't expect. Nonetheless, what is he suggesting? He's suggesting that if the people choose a ruler in a different way, or under a different model, right? If they democratically elect their representatives, then that has the same status as the king.
Well, it's kind of like the book of Judges. The judges there were, they were like kings.
They were temporary, partial kings.
Right.
Okay? Whoever leads the people, whoever's been elected by the Yishuv, may rule in accordance with the laws of kingship, since these encompass the needs of the people at that time and in that situation. Okay, in other words, this suggestion is that a democratic government, if it's by the consent of the people, is certainly no less legitimate and has no less a moral demand for, that's the word, has no less sovereignty than does a king, which is chosen by at least initially, by the will of the people.
So in that scenario, the people don't have sovereignty.
People
The
certainly
government.
do.
No, in the United States, we talk about the people being sovereign,
Right.
right? But here we're talking about the leader, the shofet.
No, he is saying that people are
that-
sovereign.
That's the way I'm reading
He's
it.
saying that the government derives its authority.
Legitimacy.
How do you say samchut in English? It's authority.
Yeah.
It's authority from the consent of the people.
Yeah, that part I understood.
Yeah.
But it seemed, maybe I misunderstood you, but that's all.
Okay, maybe because I used the word sovereignty with government, then I shouldn't.
Yeah.
Apologize.
Okay.
Okay. I think you're correct. The sovereignty lies with the people, and the leadership derives its authority from the people. Okay, so that's more fallacious. Okay, now, last but not least, Jonathan Sachs put this very nicely, of blessed memory. He says the real issue, as the Torah sees it, is not between monarchy and democracy, and that's I think quite true from what we've seen. The Torah accepts a shofet. The Torah accepts a king. So why shouldn't the Torah accept a parliament? Why not? But between government that is or is not freely chosen by the governed. To be sure, the Torah is systematically skeptical about politics. In an ideal world, Israel will be governed by God alone. Given, however, that this is not an ideal world, there must be some human power with the authority to ensure that laws are kept and enemies are repelled. But that power is never unlimited. It comes with two constraints. First, it is subject to the overarching authority of God and his law, right? That's the king's copy of the Sefer Torah. And second, it is confined to the genuine pursuit of the people's interests. Okay, the king shouldn't be, or the government shouldn't be pursuing its own interests. It should be pursuing the people's interests. Any attempt by a ruler to use power for personal advantage is illegitimate. Okay, and he gives us his example. Hey, he gives us his example in the votes, right? You know the story, right? Where King Achav, right? His wife wants a vineyard, so the king can forcibly take away the vineyard, right? And then the prophet, by the way, comes, and so the prophet is no less than Elijah, right? But it doesn't work out like it did with David. Okay, the bottom,
Sarah.
yeah. Bottom line, to sum all this up, rule through the consent of the governed, which is a central aspect of classic liberalism. Does it have a parallel in the Jewish tradition? I think you can very forcibly say that it does. I think even more than the sanctity of the individual. The sanctity of the individual exists in both traditions, but it's conceived in very different ways. And it leads to rights on the one hand or obligations on the other. It also has different ramifications. Okay. When it comes to the consent of the governed, I think that the parallel is much closer. I think that the Jewish tradition did not develop models of government. What's the word? That are as sophisticated as modern liberalism did. Okay, but in principle, the idea is solid. Okay, that the people are to be governed by through their own consent. That there are limits on what leaders can and should do, and that in principle, you can't say the Torah mandates democracy. You don't find the idea in the Torah. Democracy is a Greek word, not a Hebrew word. But on the other hand, once the idea or the format of a democracy exists, right, you can easily argue, without too much trouble even, right, that a democratically elected government suits the values of the Jewish tradition. Okay.
What is the idea that voice of the people is the voice of God? That's also. I'm not sure that comes from Jewish tradition, but
is there like a quote like that?
It's a Latin phrase, vox populi, vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God.
That's the Latin, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure that is there any parallel in
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Look at vox populi on Google afterwards. What?
Historically, our voice was anything but the voice of God. We were always not obeying.
Okay. Okay. So next week we have our final issue. Our final issue is a tradition of dialogue with multiple voices. You have a central idea in the liberal tradition is freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience involves freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Okay, and in the Jewish tradition, you have this dialogue of multiple voices, arguments for the sake of heaven, that kind of thing. And we'll do a bit of a comparison of those. And then we get to modern Jewish history. Well, have a good week and may our country, the wounded be healed, the captives be freed, and the enemy defeated.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi Kadish.
Thank you indeed.
Yeah, sure.